Before I begin, I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather here today, as well as the diverse and vibrant native communities who make their home here. Today we're here to mark the 10th anniversary of the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition. But more than that, whether we come from human rights or from science and engineering, or we intersect both, today we're here with a shared commitment to defending human rights, the human rights of everyone, through fact, through truth, through evidence. As we see space for civil society continuing to narrow, we come together today with shared interests and with shared responsibilities. Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, is pictured here at the launch of the coalition 10 years ago, when she said, "A vehicle that will increase collaboration between the scientific and human rights communities and bring human rights to scientists and the conduct of science is particularly forward-looking. It's no exaggeration to say that everyone stands to benefit from such a project." And so that is what we have aimed to do and we continue to aim to do. It encapsulates our intention as we launch this new ambitious enterprise in 2009. This banner is, or was, I see they're trying to hang it up, available outside, outlining what the coalition has been doing since it was launched and what led up to what gave rise to the initiative. And we encourage you who are part of the coalition to add stickers indicating what you as individual affiliates or as member organizations have done to contribute to the coalition's impact. Planning for the coalition began in 2005 following a conference much like this one, bringing together human rights practitioners and scientists, particularly scientific membership organizations, where the need for a network of scientific organizations focused on human rights was evident. Together we recognize the multiple ways in which science and human rights intersect, including that scientists, engineers, and health professionals have human rights, as we all do, but there are rights very particular to the practice of their profession. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of movement. Science and technology can be applied for human rights, and we will hear many examples of that throughout the conference. But also the flip side, the conduct and application of science can have negative human rights impacts. And we'll be talking somewhat about that as we explore both the opportunities but also the risks associated with emerging technologies. There is a right to science recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in international treaties. And finally, scientists, engineers, and health professionals can serve as a constituency for human rights. And that is part of the reason we're gathered here today. When the coalition launched, we saw the coalition as bridge building and coordinating, both within the scientific community, among scientific associations and across disciplines, and between the scientific and human rights communities. We also envisaged a focus on education and capacity building, again, within scientific associations, our own and others that call on us, and within the human rights community. And so with that, in January of 2009, we launched. I became coordinator of the coalition in 2009, and since then we've developed and maintained a strong core membership, which currently stands at 24 member organizations and 2 affiliated organizations. We also benefit from the engagement of over 100 affiliated individual scientists. So what have we done in this time? What have we achieved? We've helped build the capacity of human rights organizations and scientists to collaborate effectively. We've done that in multiple ways, including a webinar series over several years, demonstrating the ways in which scientific methods and tools can be used in human rights research and documentation. We've supplemented that with a guide to help translate between the two communities, identify different approaches, different priorities, foreshadow questions that might arise in a collaboration. And that's the document available there, which is also translated into Spanish. We've facilitated scientific organization efforts to integrate human rights into their work, their codes of ethics, their activities. We've supported students and faculty in integrating science and human rights into their learning and into their teaching. This series of videos accompany a toolkit that is intended to facilitate students who want to organize, lead campus events on science and human rights. And we've convened thought leaders and conducted original research to inform local and global deliberations, including on human rights and human subjects protections and the social responsibilities of scientists and engineers. And for the life of the coalition, we've also focused on the right to science, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. It happens to be work that I've been involved in, but it's also work that the coalition is very rightfully proud of. Starting in 2010, the coalition built on a statement of AAAS recognizing the right to science as core to the mission of the organization and undertaking to coordinate across scientific associations to bring the perspective of scientists to a UN process on defining the human right to science. Even before we had completed our first round of research, the work we were doing was reflected in a UN report on the right. And then in 2013, we published our first report. It was a report, as you'll hear later in this conference, built on multiple focus groups engaging many disciplines. And it really is the seminal piece that has influenced the UN's thinking on what this right means. We built on that through a global questionnaire and engagement particularly of global health practitioners on what this right means at a global level. And we have seen that work now referenced in multiple places. I have only two examples here. This one published by the academies, this one in another independent journal. And so it was last year, on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that my collaborator in this work, Margaret Vitullo, and I published an editorial in Science calling on the UN to finally and definitively define the right to science. The question is, what now? How do we actually make this operational? And you'll have to stay to the last session of this conference to know what we're doing in that regard. So all of this activity, what does it amount to? And in thinking about that as we planned this conference, I was able to come up with at least three things. First, the coalition has legitimized scientific society engagement in human rights. When I first started at AAAS, which was 2 years before the coalition was launched, I was at one of the planning meetings for the coalition. And there was discussion about how human rights were political, they were potentially too political for scientific associations to legitimately become involved in. Well, how things have changed. The actions of our members have been as numerous as they have been varied, bringing human rights to their members through publications that address the promise and/or the perils of the conduct of their discipline for human rights, amending their codes of ethics to integrate human rights, establishing special interest groups on human rights, and engaging in policy and advocacy on human rights as it can be informed by their disciplinary experience and expertise. The list is long, and with these activities comes greater peer support, even pressure in certain circumstances for scientific societies to engage more in human rights. The coalition has also empowered students to pursue the intersections of science and human rights. 5 years ago, we began a student poster and essay competition, and here you have some of our winners. We've heard from our winners that through this competition, we have given them a boost, knowing that a community of scientists and human rights practitioners exists to support and further work at the intersection. so that they too can consider pursuing this as a career option. We have our two most recent student winners with us today. Are they in the auditorium? Do you want to put your hands up? Welcome, and we invite you all to please speak with them and share your experience at working at the intersections of science and human rights so that they too feel welcomed and a part of this community. Finally, the Coalition has begun to develop a voice for scientific societies as a collective on issues of national and global concern. Following from a coalition meeting focused on the rights of persons with disabilities as they relate to science and technology, the Executive Directors Circle of the coalition, together with AAAS, decided to urge the US government to ratify the relevant convention. It was at a time where doing so actually made political sense. It was possible, there was bipartisan support. Unfortunately, in the Senate that failed by 2 votes, but it did demonstrate that there was a willingness, even an eagerness on the part of the members of this coalition to engage nationally on issues of human rights. And then in our work on the right to science, we've had significant impact on the UN's deliberations on the meaning of the right. So I now come back to a quote from Mary Robinson. You might guess that I quite admire her. This is not from 10 years ago, but from almost 20 years ago. She said, "When the target is human suffering and the cause human rights, mere rhetoric is not adequate to the task in hand. What are needed are solid methodologies, careful techniques, and effective mechanisms to get the job done." So here we are to take stock of how far we've come in getting the job done, but more importantly, to recognize how far we still have to go. I want to acknowledge the sponsors of this conference who are making it possible, the speakers for your contributions to content, and to the participants who are hopefully going to be carrying this work forward with us into the future. Only together can we identify needs and grapple with approaches to addressing them. Our objectives in this meeting are to further build the community of human rights organizations using science and technology for impact, and scientists, engineers, and health professionals who are interested in connecting their skills to human rights work. We want to identify the applications and risks of emerging technologies for human rights and identify next steps in each area. And we want to further efforts to address the rights of scientists to do their work responsibly, free from intimidation and persecution. So without further ado, let's get to work. Thank you. So I will now introduce our Dorothy Phillips, Dr. Dorothy Phillips, who will in turn be introducing our keynote speaker. Dr. Phillips serves as Director at Large for the American Chemical Society Board of Directors, as board liaison for the Society's science and human rights work, that monitoring the cases of scientists worldwide whose rights have been abridged. She worked closely with the Office of International Activities to expand its human rights programming to include webinars, symposia, and collaborations. Dr. Phillips holds a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Cincinnati, and she's represented the American Chemical Society on the Coalition Council for the past 5 years. Dorothy.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning. I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Alfred Brownell. Dr. Alfred Brownell has devoted the last decade to preserving the rainforests and other natural resources of Liberia. One of Africa's leading environmental and human rights defender, Dr. Brownell works in the area of indigenous land rights, such as natural resource rights and the sustainable use of natural resources. As a founder, CEO, and lead campaigner at Green Advocates, Liberia's first public interest environmental law and human rights organization. Dr. Brownell has worked for almost 20 years as a researcher, legal counsel, and advocate for impoverished rural communities to ensure them a voice in decisions affecting their natural resources. In his field research, Dr. Brownell has established the serious human rights impacts of large agribusiness activities, including the destruction of sacred sites, burial grounds, farmlands, forests, and wetlands that serve as the primary source of food for local communities. He has also documented the deleterious impact on food security and on traditional subsistence farming practices prompted by the introduction of monocrop agriculture. In April 2019, earlier this year, Dr. Brownell was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize, the world's most prestigious honor for the half-dozen grassroots environmental activists who receive it annually. The prize was established in San Francisco in 1989 by Richard and Rhoda Goldman, founders of the Goldman Fund, which for 6 decades donated $700 million to nonprofit organizations that were trying to make the world a better and safer place. Dr. Brownell has been committed to that same goal, even as his own existence has grown traumatic and dangerous. And I quote Windham in saying that we are in a war for this planet. He was trained for his self-made role by graduating from the Louis Arthur Grimes School of Law at the University of Liberia in 1999. In addition, his education includes the 1994 graduate of the University of Liberia, College of Agriculture and Forestry, giving him a Bachelor's of Science in General Agriculture, and a 2002 graduate of Tulane University Law School in New Orleans. The Goldman Prize organizers also stated that, under threat of violence, environmental lawyer and activist Alfred Brownell stopped the clear cutting of Liberia's tropical forests by palm oil plantation developers. His campaign protected 513,500 acres of primary forest that constitute one of the world's most important biodiversity hotspots, enabling indigenous communities to continue their stewardship of the forest. In his office at Northeastern School of Law, Dr. Brownell told Ian Thompson his story of persecution and escape from Africa to Northeastern University in Boston. In 2014, while Dr. Brownell was returning from inspection of a Liberian forest that he was trying to save, his car was among those stopped by a mob of 150 men armed with machetes, guns, and other weapons. They made it clear to him that to murder and cannibalize him. But in a shocking turn, the chief decided to spare him from his would-be killers. 2 years later, amid a spree of surveillance, phone tapping, and the burglary of his office, Brownell learned of a warrant for his arrest. Alongside with his wife and 2 children, he escaped on a flight to Boston with the help of an international network of lawyers and human rights advocates, including the Northeastern Program on Human Rights and the Global Economy. So he was installed in January 2017 as a visiting scholar at the Boston campus. Dr. Brownell is now a distinguished scholar in residence at the Northeastern School of Law. Additionally, Brownell last year became the first at Northeastern to hold the Institute of International Education School Scholar Rescue Fund Bo Biden Chair. The chair was created in 2016 to honor the legacy of Bo Biden, the former Attorney General of Delaware. The son of former Vice President Joe Biden, Bo died in 2015 from brain cancer. Dr. Brownell has expressed gratitude to Northeastern University's president and the entire community for supporting him, his family, and his work. This morning, he is going to talk about the connection between science and human rights and the importance of scientific evidence for human rights advocacy. I welcome now to the podium Dr. Brownell.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the leadership, members, and affiliate organization of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Science and Human Rights Coalition, and all those who made this conference possible, inviting and providing me this opportunity to learn, share, and network. Please permit me to send up a shout out in this hall. I don't know how many of you are here, but I'm sure is there someone from the American Anthropological Society, the American Association of Geographers, the American Sociological Society, the Association of Information Science Technology, the Linguistic Society of America? Are you in this room? Are you here? What about sociologists with all borders? Thank you. To our distinguished participants, whether you are a scientist, engineers who work in private industry, government officials, and members of impacted vulnerable communities, or students in science, engineering, human rights, health, and law, as well as those involved with academic research, thank you for coming. You left your busy schedule to grace this conference with your expertise, knowledge, vision, skills, and time. We would not have been here if it were not for you. Thank you. I feel privileged and honored to be addressing so much people here today. I look forward to learning, sharing, teaching, networking, and building solidarity actions, as well as engaging in new partnership. My late mother always told me, Lahai, time ready flies. Time wait for no man. Through the lens of science, my mother has been proven correct. We have seen our world and this splendid strength from being the center of the universe, as suggested by earlier scientists, to now a tiny speck among the galaxies. September 20th, 1848 seemed like yesterday, but that was more than 170 years ago when William Charles Redfield, Matthew Fontaine Maury, and 78 others persons formed the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Just 1 year before, in 1847, a group of descendants of freed slaves proclaimed, "We, the people of the Republic of Liberia, were originally the inhabitants of the United States of North America. In some part of that country, we were debarred by law from all the rights and privileges of men. In other parts, public sentiments more powerful than law frowned down on us. We were everywhere, shut out from all civil office. We were excluded from all participation in government. We were taxed with all consent. We were compelled to contribute to the resources of a country which gave us no protection. We were made a separate and distinct class, and against us every avenue to improvement was effectively closed. Strangers from all lands of a color different from ours were preferred before us. We uttered complaints, but they were unattended to, or only met by alleging the peculiar institution of the country. All hope of a favorable change in our country was thus wholly extinguished in our bosom, and we looked with anxiety abroad for some asylum from the deep degradation. The western coast of Africa was the place selected by American benevolence and philanthropy for our future, removed beyond those influences which depressed us in our native land. It was hoped we would be enabled to enjoy those rights and privileges and exercise and improve those faculties which God of nature has given us in common with the rest of mankind. Under the auspices of the American Colonization Society, we established ourselves here on land acquired by purchase from the Lord of the soil. Those boys established Africa First Republic, the Republic of Liberia. 26 years before that, the free slaves set sail from the shores of the United States on a ship named the Elizabeth the Mayflower and headed to West Africa, their goal being to civilize and Christianize the indigenous people on the continent. Ironically, those former slaves themselves became slave owners. That is another story for another time. Today, in the next couple of days, we have committed to take stock of progress made towards building effective partnership between scientific community and human rights communities. During this time, we will share lessons learned and identify and develop collaborative multidisciplinary approaches to the most urgent human rights challenges ahead of us. Are we there? Are we there yet? In 1848, when William Charles Redfield, a meteorologist known for his work in the observation of the directionality of wind in hurricanes, became the first president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, could he have contemplated that the issues he was captivated with, such as the extreme weather conditions, including the formation of hurricanes vortices, that could have caused or induced by the action of humankind, resulting in what science has established today to be some of the most egregious human rights violations and humanitarian crises ever witnessed on this planet. You have informed us that we are approaching the great dying, an era referred to as Permian. In fact, a number of you in this room have said we face the sixth extinction, while others have calculated that we are above a tenth of the way to the Permian. Now, if this era, in 250 years ago, where up to 96% of all marine species and more than 2/3 of terrestrial species perish, this makes our two world wars look like a child play. Egregious human rights and humanitarian crisis seems to be an extreme understatement to describe what we will face in the future. There's no comparison in our short human history. I can still hear my mom saying, "Lahai, time flies." Now, no one understands this issue and have seen it much better than you. You have seen and studied the numbers. You have analyzed the data. You have seen the trends and the patterns. No one understands the causal relationship, the impact, the effects, the economics better than you. You are the early warning system. I must also say, based on demands from humankind, you have also contributed to the problem. The advances in science and technology have had both negative and positive impact, bordering on ethical, moral, and legal responsibilities. When profits are only the incentive driving science, technology, and innovation, people and the planet are viewed through the lens of a commodity to be exploited, resulting in mass exclusion, extinction, and inequality. Corporate capture replaced our social contract. The accountability dynamics between citizens and their government is extinguished. Why people vote for their leaders, those leaders become accountable to only the corporate powers. The phenomenon of the right deficit emerges. Property and land rights become unsecure. Land, culture, the history, religion, and natural resources are grabbed, sometimes resulting in massive deforestation, eviction, displacement, and mass migration. Democracy and the rule of law, I honor mine. Indigenous people, communities, activists, environmental and human rights defenders are not just stigmatized and criminalized, they are murdered as well. when cheap products and goods are dumped on poor, making it almost impossible to innovate local entrepreneurship, when less than 10% of the world population, mainly men, and white men at that rate, control more than 10%, control more than 50% of the global wealth, we do not need a rocket scientist to tell us that we are in trouble. We know it is trouble. You know it is trouble. We know because we've seen some of the government and big businesses knowingly and deliberately being indifferent, despite the science to the contrary. We have witnessed the sickening debates around the science of the climate crisis and environmental degradation. You know the numbers. You have seen the data. You have seen the trends, the impact and the effects. So I am preaching to the choir here. My attempt today, however, is not to put science on trial. I have seen science work for poor communities when responsibly utilized. Science and technology can therefore be used to either promote or undermine human rights and the environment. I would therefore argue today that science and technology can serve as a vital tool for human rights in the partnership for justice for the planet and its people. My early experience with science was when I was a kid in primary school in Liberia. The educational system was so bad that kids could hardly read and write. Papers, pen, and writing pads were a luxury. Our teachers could read our lessons to us and expect us to memorize them. So one day, our teacher gave us a fill-in-the-blank quiz. We were taught that science is the study of living and non-living things. The fill-in-the-blank question read as follows: science is the study of blank and blank. Since I could not read, I asked my teacher to read the question. He said, science is the study of blank and blank. I laughed, turned to my classmate and said, the answer is very easy. Can you please spell me blank? The class burst into a loud laughter that I still continue to hear up to today. I was so embarrassed that I wanted the eyes to open up and devour me. For months, I became the fun guy of the class. I was bullied, and I hated school. Many days I would come to school, stop halfway, and go back home while my mom was at work. It was terrifying. The bullying, however, did not stop at the school. My classmate, as may be aware, also lived in my neighborhood. I could run from school, but I could not run away from my community. I decided to face my shame head on. The next year, I returned to school, spent hours like a parrot mimicking my teacher and learning how to read by associating what I heard from my teacher with the characters on the page. It paid off. I became the top of the class and received a double promotion. It was a quantum leap on the journey of destiny. I fell in love with science. I would spend hours observing the ants how they transported their food into their home. How such small creatures could carry weight more than their own size, I wondered. I entered the science college, wanted desperately to become a medical doctor, but destiny, as you are aware, always decide other ways. I ended studying agriculture and forestry, and then literal law. It was in law school that I became angry. Liberia had witnessed a terrible civil war, driven by greed for power, wealth, and natural resources. The president was the warlord who led the gruesome rebellion. Words are inadequate to describe the atrocities. More than 250,000 murdered. Almost 20 years later, the victims continue to walk in the street with their heads bowed, while the perpetrators arrogantly display their loots. Sadly, Liberia has been characterized by contradictions. As you are aware, the free slaves, you remember, became slave masters. After the war, the plunderers and perpetrators became leaders and role models. The looting and plundering continued way after the end of the war, even after 3 democratic transitions. Taking lessons from my primary school, I did not ask my friend to spell me in blank. This time, I talked them into action. We organized Green Advocates, Liberia's first environmental human rights and public interest law organization. Along with a number of colleagues, we decided to turn our anger into action, combining our knowledge and experience of science, natural resources, and the law. We took on the power and the big corporations. One of the first was Brickstone Firestone. The company, in early 1926, had obtained a million concession from the government of Liberia to cultivate rubber. First historical activities included mass eviction of thriving towns and communities, unchecked pollution of natural environment, and farming labor used for fishing, drinking, cooking, and etc. For 80 years, this company dumped her waste on poor communities, used kids as slave laborers, and Liberia as a source of raw material. While Firestone prospered, Liberia descended into grinding poverty. We launched a massive campaign in 2004 to hold Firestone accountable. With the support of a scientist, we brought into the country water testing and monitoring equipment. The campaign attracted media attention and public outcry, especially as we shared the result of the testing. In one media report, here are the voices of community members. One member said, "This is a complete massacre. We want the world to know that massacres are going on in our villages, not guns, but from Firestone polluted stream." Another said, "Firestone only came here to kill us, while our government is only watching the show." Under pressure from our campaigns and our advocacy, in March 2008, the company produced an environmental management plan of its water treatment facilities and its operation. The agency shared the management plan with us and asked us in 3 days to review and provide comments. The document contained 237 pages. The scientists who assisted us to review and analyze the ESA informed us that the substance of the ESA was confined to only 39 pages of the document, but the rest of the document were relatively useless papers, things copy, examples, and just to make sure that we confuse us. And that the ESA was not specific on timing and dates for collecting water samples and monitoring. It did not provide locations and did not mention how the results of the weekly sampling were being analyzed and made available to stakeholders. The report also did not list the hazardous chemicals and did not reveal the quantities of the substance that the company was using in this operation. Based on this analysis and our review back to the environmental agency, the company was forced to revise and update its program and installed a modern water treatment facilities after more than 80 years. The company also provided alternative bore wells for communities. This was science in action. But science was also in action working for Firestone to undermine those rights. In another action, a company called Sam Darby, in April of 2009, Sam Darby Plantation entered into a concession agreement with the government of Liberia for almost 200,000 hectares of forest land to grow palm oil. Over a period of 3 years, with an option to renew for another 30 years. In October 2011, the communities affected by the operation requested us to provide assistance. In that regard, we went into the field, we conducted an investigation, and we demanded that the company provide an environmental impact assessment. In 2010, the company produced its environmental and social impact assessment. We requested support from a scientist friend. His analysis were very detailed, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to provide a few excerpts. In one striking example, it talks about characterizing the project area has been degraded. In the company report, it said that most of the areas where it was going to put in the palm oil were all degraded areas. But this scientist wrote back and said, in many places the Sam W report characterized the project as degraded. However, today I downloaded a Google Earth satellite image using the UTM coordinate. You know what that is here. Listed on page 33 of the ESIA report. I'm attaching this report. As you will see, there are many areas within the project areas that seem to include hefty forest canopies. Using the scientist analysis, we challenged the company ERC. The government and Sam David decided to ignore those challenges and refuse to revise the ESIA. The agency issued the permit. Sam David continued to violate the conditions of the permit. We brought action against Sam David enforcing the permit condition in a case filed before the environmental agency. During the case, it was found that the company had violated the permit conditions. The agency fined the company $50,000. Despite that violation, Sam David continued to ignore any environmental conditions. So in 2010, we filed a complaint before the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. The complaint focused on most of what was generated from the environmental and social impact assessment. On the basis of that, the Roundtable issued a stop order. Since 2010, out of 220,000 hectares of farmland, Sam David has only cultivated 10,500. Last month, Sam David announced it is divesting out of Liberia after losing millions of dollars. Sam David and the government manipulated the science, but as you can see, it also cost them millions of dollars. Manipulating the science to favor profit over people and the planet can and do have consequences for business as well. In Liberia, we refer to these businesses that have manipulated science to maximize profits as top projects. I will give a review of a few of them. ArcelorMittal, located in Nima County, is in the mining sector. Operation started in 2014. The company complained that the mining industry has faced major challenges due to lower iron ore prices on the global market. In 2015, 250 workers were laid redundant based on the fact that its analysis of the economics of the ore were inaccurate. Despite the fact that we have pointed out this fact to them, they ignored that. Then that led them to reduce their import and led towards retrenchment of workers. Another company, the Sahara Rubber Corporation in Margibi County, in 2016, it announced that it was slowing down its operation due to decline in the price of rubber on the global market. The company said in the release that it has closed all departments and sections associated with tapping operation. It said it will lay off 300 of its employees, nearly half of the entire workforce. It explained that the exercise was to mitigate the financial and economic shock that collapsed its furrow. But we had engaged this company. We had done the environmental social impact assessment. We had looked at the financial and fiscal capacity of this company and said it would have had problems. It ignored those problems, and this is the result it faced. Sam W, which I talked about, is facing even more problem now. So in the 2013, due to difficulty in securing adequate land to expand its oil palm operation, the company decided that it was going to hold on and try to find a way to negotiate itself around that process. It did not succeed. Local communities, they claimed to the land and refused to provide additional land. The area we were trying to expand, as we mentioned in the ESIA, were areas that was highly forested with high carbon stock. It was been in violation of both its standards under the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil and Environmental Agency. Because of that, it began to lose millions of dollars because it had assets that it could not have afforded to produce. In 2017, with over 700,000 overgrown ceilings unplanted and excess manpower not being utilized, it canceled and laid off over 600 workers contract. In September of 2019, it announced that it would divest from Liberia. Another company, Golden Petroleum, followed the same trend, refused to accept the science in terms of the areas that it was operating to put its palm near protected areas, near areas where there were important habitats of pygmy hippos and forest elephants. That its oil palm would have destroyed this vast ecosystem. It ignored the science. We filed with a complaint. That complaint led the roundtable to issue an additional order. The company so far has 313,000 hectares of forest land. Based on the complaint, it's been stored since 2010. It has cultivated only 50,000 hectares of forest land and is losing millions of dollars. The Homebrew operation, this is a gold mining of the gold mining company, based on field research done by Grain Advocate, we clearly established that the area of this operation was near protected areas, important water sources, scenic, environmental, and fragile areas, major habitat for the pygmy hippos, that is planned for investing into gold mining will have caused serious impairment to the ecosystem. It ignored that process. We made this information available to the media and made it available to the legislature. In 2016, based on that information, the Liberian Senate refused to ratify its mineral development agreement. The Buchanan Renewable Energy. Buchanan Renewable Biomass Project remains stalled since 2012, after the largest European energy company, Vattenfall and Swedform, decided to divest. The company dismissed 600 workers. Grievances of the local communities in terms of loss of livelihood and harm caused the company operation. In 2011, Gravik and another European group published a report looking at the impact of the operation of the company. The report, entitled Burning Rubber, highlighted the impact of business activities on the company operation in producing biomass. It particularly found that a number of smallholder farmers who are engaged with the company were facing difficult problems in sustaining their livelihood, and that BR removal of old rubber trees from Firestone operation had increased the hardship on local charcoal energy producers. In March, another report, Cut and Run, provided an update on the impact of its operation. Despite these reports and the analysis, it continued to ignore the science and the evidence. In 2013, along with Accountability Council, we, assisted by Farmer Charcoal, we filed a complaint with the US OPEC, demanding redress for its funding of biomass project, which caused serious human rights violation. OPEC investigated the complaint and published a report confirming that all three groups of complainants suffer harm from the project and revealed gaps in the OPEC ability to track development outcome or identify and protect vulnerable groups. OPEC failed to recommend compensation for the harm caused. Science, as we have seen in the Liberian case studies are presented, may have a double edge. People and planet are severely impacted, but businesses also face consequences. This is not just a Liberian problem or an African phenomenon. This is a global problem requiring global action. For example, in Kenya, the National Environmental Tribunal overturned a clearance for a proposed 1,050 megawatt coal-fired power plant in Lamu, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, based on scientific critique of the environmental impact assessment submitted by the corporate project. In Russia, the European Court of Human Rights ordered Russia to pay thousands of dollars to citizens trapped in public housing, a few hundred meters away from a polluting steel manufacturing plant, based on scientific evidence that the illness of the citizens were presumptively caused by exposure to emission from polluting facilities. In India, the National Green Tribunal orders remediation of a massive pile of asbestos which above villages in the state of Jharkhand, based on scientific tests revealing harmful level of asbestos in agricultural field. In Mexico, a federal court suspended construction of hydroelectric project along Jalisco River that threatened access to clean water based on scientific evidence that the project will have disrupted traditional water systems, including freshwater spring, and risk irreparable ecological damage, water rights of indigenous communities. In Jamaica, the government of Jamaica moved to protect indigenous communities and drinking water supplies from the threat of bauxite ore mining, based on scientific evidence of how bauxite mining can pollute groundwater. In Australia, the Land and Environment Code of New South Wales refused permission for an open cast coal mine based on scientific evidence that greenhouse gas emission from the mine will abrogate required climate change mitigation pathway identified by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We are in this boat together. No, science is not on trial. We are. I've seen science work for poor communities. I've also seen how profits have driven science, technology, and innovation. I've seen corporate capture replace our social contract. Do not forget the phenomena of the right deficit. Have you thought about why people form long human chains across the Sahara on their way to Europe? Have you thought about why thousands of people, cargoes, are on boats, braving drowning in the Mediterranean Sea on their way to Europe? Have you thought about why people caravan walk thousands of miles across several countries, braving people smugglers, drug lords, and gangs with their babies on their way to the United States? When land is grabbed, when livelihood is altered, when right is threatened, when cheap goods are dumped on poor communities, do you know what else is grabbed? Even where the science is unequivocal, we have seen some government and big businesses knowingly and deliberately being indifferent. While science and technology can be used to either promote or undermine human rights and the environment, science and technology, no doubt, can serve as a vital tool for human rights in the partnership for justice for the planet and its people. Are we there yet? I still hear the voice of my mom. Lahai, time flies. Time waits for no man. It is time to act. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. If you would like to ask questions, there are microphones in the aisle. You can just come to the microphones.
Are you shy? Good.
It's time to act, but I mean, what do you suggest? What are the immediate steps you can recommend?
I think we've seen a trend of what is working. We've seen that when science works with activists and human rights organizations on the ground who are doing these things, we've seen a lot of success. What I think is required is an intensification of that process. We've seen some of the work done by the Science and Human Rights Coalition here. Some of the work, like, for example, having scientists on call. We need a lot more of that. We also need to figure out how that information is actually available on the grounds and not just available to elite organizations who are based in urban areas, because that's where the need really is felt. we hope to find a lot more of that. Because we see in our work, the success that we achieve, for example, in West Africa, is based on the fact that we had access to scientists who were based here in the US and in Europe. So we did cases when we had to review an environmental impact assessment, we had access to them. When we needed to do a GIS mapping, we had access to them. When we needed a sociologist to do analytical work in the field, establishing rights of communities, we had access to them. When we needed to look at anthropological footprints of communities, we had access to them. Many other groups do not have that access. And I think it's time to really innovate and move that to another level. So there's a lot more engagement between that person and science. Because, I mean, the whole question of trying to establish causation is what has been the real problem. Many groups will go in the field and they will do their report, but then they don't have the benefit of a scientist who will do those analytical work to support them. And that can make a huge difference. And our success story can be attributed to that fact because we had that kind of support. So I think it's time to really make that available. And I hope that scientists in the room and those who are part of this arrangement will figure out how to be more engaging. I would feel that we need to have a lot more conversation. I don't know, have a lot of conversation between the science and those who are involved in the human rights fields. I think we're not having that much of a conversation. We've got to have a lot more at different levels of that conversation, at the global level, at the national level, at the local level. I also figure we need to find a way to transfer a lot of this skill set and technology. It will be important, for example, that scientists work at a global level, build up partnership relationship with those who are at the national level so they can build their hands and build that capacity, maybe linked towards universities. So, for example, in Liberia, when we did our work, it was very difficult to find like anthropologists or sociologists who would do this sort of field work. We had to find a way to find those who are in the US who will link up to that work. But that was just on a temporary basis. We hope that could be over a medium to long-term basis where the skill set is enhanced and strengthened and is available at that level. So groups now can have access to that. Because the whole also construct of local content building and the whole question of also co-creating and co-designing the materials that will make available to those actors. Because sometimes there's a whole thing about culture and context and language. Sometimes scientists come from here based on my experience in the field, you take them to a village, and there are some concerns about strangers coming in. So if we're able to find a way to build that capacity at a local level, that would be very helpful.
When the government of the country that you're working in is not supportive of your work, how can you welcome people coming from the outside who are seen as adversaries?
You know, the way I answer that question is if we will bow down to what governments will always say, if we will not stand up to what we believe in with a passion, I'm not sure the things we see happening currently. Those of you, that's why I say you are the scientists. You've seen the numbers. You've seen the trends. You've seen the data. You have seen it. We know where the planet is going. We know what the impact is on human beings. So if we are only going to say, well, the government is not happy to accept me, so others are not going to come in, it becomes a problem. I've seen where when I had outsiders come to Liberia or come to West Africa to work with me, that in itself has enhanced and strengthened my security because it sends signals to the government that I'm not just alone, that we are part of a global process that others are looking over. And that has been very helpful to send that clear message. But beyond that, there are things that you just cannot compromise, even if you are outside of Liberia. So take our situation. Yes, the forest system, the largest carbon sink in the region, a forest with highly biodiversity species, in the region of the pygmy hippos and the forest elephants, the home of indigenous people, that the government decided is going to give it out to construction, 1 million hectares that's been protected by indigenous people. And we had a decision to make. Based on the pressure, should you just accept it and walk away, or should you do something? Because what we are doing is not so much for ourselves or for the indigenous people who were there. Yeah, it's a forest that was important for the rest of the world. We have to find a way to protect it. And so we stood up. So if you were out, I would assume that you believe in that principle of trying to protect that. And despite what the danger is, you try to do that. For many years, I faced the danger. Not that we're not aware that I was threatened, not that we're not aware that we're being followed. You know, my office was burglar, my phone was hacked, my email was hacked, I was being trailed all over the place. I was attacking the forest by men who tried to kill me. But we continue doing that. I mean, the only reason why I even left Liberia was when they threatened my kids. And they threatened my wife. And friends said, well, you know, you're a crazy activist. But you have to realize that you also are a father and a husband. You can allow your work to endanger your family. So that's what got me out. But even here in the US, I continue to do my work. My biggest victory was in 2018 when I won the case against the company and stopped them from taking the forest. Today, as we speak, a $3.7 billion investment that should have cleared 300,000 hectares of forest land is stranded. They have a nursery of almost 200 million seedlings that have overgrown. They have taken a massive financial loss. So this is what you have to let them understand, that we can allow this to happen. So yes, they are a threat, but it pales in comparison to what we have to do. We are at a point where I believe we are at war, like, you know, someone just me said, for this planet. You see what's going on. I don't have to narrate that. You in this room, more than any other person, are fully aware of what the impact is. And sometimes, when I was asked to come and give a talk, I was wondering what your daily life looked like. Because when you are seeing the science, and you look at these analyses and doing the simulations, what is going through your mind? We're just working on the impact. We're just trying to address this from a right perspective. But you live with this. So we have to be compelled into action. Because we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. What you have described to us, that we are at a point where we are going to the 6 extinctions, no one can imagine what that is going to be like. You can't even compare this to all the wars we fought on this planet, all the atrocities. It pales in comparison to even people who died from slavery, who died from World War I and World War II, where we are going to, because the entire planet is under threat.
Thank you.